Do your coding standards mandate a level of code coverage? If so, that could be damaging your code quality. If you're interested in finding out why and what you can do about it, then stay tuned. Hi, I'm Andy from Narcolepsy Pumpkin. I'd like to share my insights with you, and if you haven't subscribed to this channel already, I'd encourage you to do so. But please stay tuned to find out how code coverage could really be damaging your code quality. Now, let's set the scene. Consider you have a mandate for 80% code coverage. So that means that 80% of the lines of code you've written are actually executed by your test suite. Now let's ponder some questions on that scenario. At what point do you think developers would likely to stop adding tests to that code base? Are they going to stop as soon as they tip over that 80% minimum requirement? Bet your ass they are. They're going to consider that job done. This week's video is brought to you by caffeine, supporting software development since 1941 in the form of tea and coffee. So just continuing down that same path, is it also safe to say that developers are likely to have 80% coverage based on the easiest test case scenarios to write? Are they going to do the low-hanging fruit first and leave some of the more complex things, the hard to test stuff? That means that code base has 20% of probably the most complicated code not covered by any tests whatsoever. Now, is that acceptable? Well, based on the rules, that mandate we set out, yes. We've set a mandate that says it's okay to have 20% of the code not covered by any tests. Is that ethical? Let's take another scenario. Say you were writing code for a self-driving car. Based on the premise that most modern cars, well, even ones that don't self-drive, have about 100 million lines of code. That would mean you were saying you had 20 million lines of code with no tests. That's 20 million lines of code, untested. If you'd written the software, would you drive it on the basis that 20 million lines of code were untested? Would you let your loved ones drive that car? Just because your code doesn't directly kill anybody or doesn't have the potential to kill anybody does not remove the ethical responsibility you have as a developer to make sure that code operates as expected in all known scenarios and is free of all known defects. Having a code base in that scenario with 20 million lines of code that have no tests covering them at all is ethically wrong. So the answer to that question, is it ethical? No. It's no more ethical than any other kind of negligence. So we've established that using code coverage in a mandated way is not a good idea. So what can we do about it? Well, that's kind of simple. Just stop using code coverage as a quality gate. Code coverage doesn't tell you whether the code is of good quality, whether it's doing what it's supposed to. In any case, the only goal that would make any sense for code coverage would be 100%. But would you ever get 100%? Well, no. That's very unlikely. There are some edge cases where you can attain 100% code coverage, but most of the time you can't. But even if you could, 100% code coverage does not assure the code is working correctly and is of good quality. Code coverage should be considered as a passive metric, and it's a metric that can be used to work out a few things, but none of those are quality. The key part is to have a test suite that tests 100% of the behavioral scenarios. So you're testing every exception state, you're testing every good use case scenario, every misuse scenario. So you know under all circumstances what the code should do, and you're assuring by test that that is what it does. And all those tests should be done through the same API, the same interface that any consumer of that code would use. Therefore, those tests become behavioral in nature and agnostic to any implementation. That makes your code base clean in respect of it's easier to maintain, easier to refactor. You can change around the implementation as long as you don't change the behavior. And that comes out of two principles. One, the passive coverage principle, which basically says that code coverage is something that passively just happens when you write good, useful tests. And the agnostic behaviors principle, which basically was saying that tests are testing behavior and are agnostic to any implementation detail. If you're interested in finding out more about my testing principles, then there'll be some links down in the description below, and there'll be some links to some videos on the end screen. Hi, I'd be interested to know what your experience is with code coverage. Have you had it mandated? If you have, then please let me know what percentage was mandated in the comments below. If you've liked this video, then please click on like, let YouTube know that this is the kind of content you want to see more of. And if you like the channel, then please click on subscribe and click on the bell if you want notifications when I post new videos. Thanks for watching, and remember, you are the future.